We continue our opponent previews, and I'm pleased to be joined by Josh Furlong, who is the sports director and Utah beat writer for KSL.com. And Josh, I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, good to be here. I'm happy to do this.
Yeah, I've met you or known you for a while. Doing some radio spots in Utah over the years, and so I'm glad we could connect for this and talk about the Utes. And it's funny. I'm old enough to remember when Utah was the only team that didn't make the Pac-12 title game out of the South, and now you can just kind of pencil them in. The last 4 real years that we've played college football, they've been in it, and the two-time defending Pac-12 champs. And what is the kind of the vibe around Utah this summer as the season gets going here? In about 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, I think the vibe is still kind of that same mentality that they've had the last few years, where Utah feels like it can compete with anybody. They obviously have some things that they want to improve on, and they want to be able to be better. But three-peat is certainly on their mind. That's something that they think is a real possibility, even with a loaded Pac-12 this season. So there's a lot of optimism there, but there is this cloud that's hanging over this program, and that is the starting quarterback. So I think that's kind of tempering expectations right now. Just the fact that Cam Rising got injured in the Rose Bowl and may or may not be available. So I think that's tempering expectations a bit. But I think, based on the roster and the personnel, Utah fans, at least for the vibe that I can get from Twitter or some message boards that other people have, that it still feels like this is a team that everybody thinks that can compete with, even the USCs, the Washingtons, the Oregons, maybe Colorado. We don't really know yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, I want to start there with Cam Rising because he's a guy that when people talk about the top quarterbacks in college football, they don't really talk about him. They'll talk about Caleb Williams and Michael Penix, led the country in passing, and Bo Nix, look at the year he had. And Cam Rising just comes out there and wins and plays good football. And I respect that guy. I mean, he has played some really good football and battled through a lot of things. From what what is the status? What are the chances he's ready to go week one? I think who do they have? Florida, right? They have Florida week one. What's his status? And if he's not able to go, who do they have as a backup?
Yeah, this is that question that's going to continually be asked until he's cleared and everything's ready. From all the talk that's been going on, and kind of what even during spring, he's on the pace to be able to be ready. At least that's what Kyle Whittingham says. There were some rumors a couple weeks ago that went over on Twitter that he had a setback and it was going to cause some problems. He kind of addressed that a little bit on Twitter. He didn't really say much, but kind of gave like an "oh really" type response. So at this point, you have to think that he's at least making progress, right? He's out there, he's been throwing, he's been doing different things that allow him to kind of get back into that quarterback form. But whether he's able to really be the Cam Rising that we're used to seeing on the field, where he can plant and he can run and he can do these different things, that's anybody's guess, right? There's obviously everybody's experienced, players that they've seen who've had an ACL tear, or something to that magnitude. Some of them, respond quickly, and others take the full 9 months, if not more, to be able to get there. So I'm curious to see he's making those progress that they need. Kyle Whittingham kind of has this timeline that he says. He hasn't released it publicly as to how long, but he was saying maybe it's 10 days, 5 days before the game that they have to give like a status that says, okay, this is the day that we have to say that Cam's ready or he's not playing. Me, I'm still a little pessimistic that he'll return to fine form and be ready for that Florida game. And if he's not, Brandon Rose, their freshman, or I guess he's a redshirt freshman quarterback. He was on their scout team last year, led their scout team. He's the penciled in favorite to be the guy that kind of leads Utah into Florida, or to Florida when they come to Utah. So it'll be interesting. That's obviously not a scenario that Utah wants to be in, having a redshirt freshman being their starting quarterback, but that may be necessity based on what's going on. So it'll be an interesting thing. And I think, that's going to be the question day one when fall camp rolls around.
Yeah. What to you makes Cam special? I mean, I feel like obviously this is Kyle Whittingham's program. And in 19 years, there's an identity with Utah, right? But it feels like once Cam became the starting quarterback, there was just this different moxie about Utah. This kind of different element. Like what to you makes him special?
Yeah, Cam's one of those guys that he's very personable with everybody. He's kind of really ultra focused on his job, but at the same time, he cares about every single person in the program. You often hear a lot of guys on offense that talk about, oh, I love my quarterback. And, it's kind of the cliche statement that you have to make as a player, whether you believe it or not. But
Mhm.
you're starting to hear that, especially when he took over from the defensive players. They know that he cares about them. And there's like this camaraderie that he's kind of built. He likes to take them out and do different things and have fun.
Yeah.
And so like from that standpoint alone, he's bringing this team morale that allows people to have faith in him. Beyond that, he's incredibly intelligent. He's one of those guys. I'm not entirely sure that he's going to have an NFL career, at least sustained. But he's one of those guys that I honestly think could have a great coaching career, because I think he understands it. He understands the game well. It's just a matter of his mechanics being able to be there, and the fact that if he can complete checkdowns in the way that they want him, going through his progressions, things that way. But overall, he's a guy that just really raises that level of Utah's program, just based on the camaraderie and that morale that he brings. So it's probably more off the field things. Obviously, he's a talented quarterback, but I think it's off the field things that's really elevated Utah's game.
Yeah. Beyond quarterback, Utah has been known for running the football on offense, and they're retooling again at running back. They lost their top 2 rushers, I believe, but they're also bringing back Brant Keithy, who's coming back from injury. What does the rest of the offense look right now?
Yeah, this is one of those scenarios where, on paper, Utah has gotten better from last year. Running back, they're as deep as they ever have been. They also have Jaquindon Jackson, who he got transitioned to running back last year after being a backup quarterback. He made the transition, and suddenly, there was a spark given, and he turned into this phenomenal player in a short period of time, right? So it's hard to judge that. But based on him working out in spring and everything there, he seems to be one of the leaders in that room that's going to really dominate. If you believe what the hype is, he could very well be a 1,500-yard rusher, 1,000-yard rusher at the minimum, that gives Utah some success. But behind him, there's several 4-star running backs that have been able to do well. The question that I have, especially, is on wide receiver. They've added a bunch of talent there, much better than probably they've had ever. The question is, can they maximize that in the same realm that you've got Brant Keithy, like you mentioned, but can you maximize it so that Brant isn't always the one that is keyed on, right? Like he's got to be able to have somebody else working on the outside to be able to help him. So I'm curious to see how that goes. I think based on the talent and the production that these players that they've brought in through the transfer portal, they've had success. So I think there's some ability there. It just depends on if Cam's throwing them on the ball or if it's Brandon Rose.
Yeah. And offensively, the line obviously is such a key. What do they look like up front?
Once again, this may be one of their most loaded offensive line classes. They brought in a freshman who was the top recruit in the state of Utah. He was getting offers from a lot of different schools. Managed to keep him last minute. He's one of the guys that, even though Utah's pretty loaded and has a lot of guys that are set, he may find he may sniff some starting reps in that line, which bodes well for Utah, given what they want. But they've got at least 3 guys on that line that have had starter experience. A 4th is probably going to move over. Just depends on what best 5 guys they've got. But this is one of those things that Utah's always been trying to build, at least 8 to 10 players that they feel confident in to be starting caliber. This spring is probably the first time we've heard them feel the most confident about that. The fact that they have the depth and the ability. So once again, if everything goes the way that it's supposed to, this could be a very good offensive line for Utah. Probably the best that we've seen in at least 5+ years.
Well, that's dangerous for Pac-12 teams, because that's always such a key for Utah. The other thing is defense. Whittingham's teams have been known for running the football and playing defense, and I believe they have 9 starters back on defense from a unit that was very good last year. What does that side of the ball look like?
Yeah, the biggest loss there is Clark Phillips on the at corner. But for the most part, Utah has everybody back, like you mentioned. So you've got an experienced unit that now has a better understanding of Kyle Whittingham's or Morgan Scalley's defense, and their ability to be able to work. Last year, I mean, they still led the Pac-12, but it wasn't the defense that people are traditionally used to seeing under Kyle Whittingham. There's a lot of blown tackles or blown assignments, missed tackles. And it really kind of frustrated a lot of what Utah wanted to do, even though they were still able to be successful. So this is a team that, they've added Levani Damuni from Stanford, who is their lead tackler. They got Miles Battle from Ole Miss at cornerback that should give them a much more length than even what Clark Phillips had. You've got some guys that have returned from LDS missions who are projected to be in the starting role at safety. So you've got guys that have been in this system now. They've got an opportunity to be able to kind of gel together a little bit more. And I expect it to be probably closer to what we're used to seeing a Utah defense look like. But there's still a lot of new pieces there that I'm curious to see how that works. But once again, like you said, it's hard to doubt a Kyle Whittingham-led defense just based on his trajectory and progress that he's made over those years.
Yeah. And special teams real quick. I got to ask you about Cole Becker because he's a guy that, has been Colorado's kicker the last 2 years. He's very good. I think he's got one of the best legs in the Pac-12. And the kicking game has always been good for Utah until the last couple of years. It's like all of a sudden, like what happened, Kyle? You don't have great special teams, but with Cole Becker, do they feel like they've kind of shored that up a little bit?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, Kyle Whittingham generally will nuance a lot of players in the sense of like whether they're good or bad or something like that. But the last few years, like you mentioned, the kicking game, he was very bold and just said they suck, they're awful. And so the fact that he was able to get Cole Becker, put him on scholarship, I think that says a lot. They have a lot of hope and faith in him. If I remember right, it was a few years ago that he hit a 56-yarder against Utah or something like that. So they've seen it, right? They understand what his strength is there. In spring, he was nailing him from deep. So I think they're really excited. If anything, if he can kick it out of the end zone on kickoffs, that'll be more than anything that Utah needs at this point. Last year, they could not figure that out, and they allowed too many teams to get extra yards based on just short kicks. So if Cole can do that, I think they hope that they don't have to kick too many field goals, but at least I think they feel like there's somebody in that room now that they have a lot of confidence in.
Yeah, he put most of his kickoffs out of the end zone last year. So I imagine being at altitude, he'll still do that at Utah. So, looking at the schedule real quick, non-conference wise, Utah's not taking it easy. I mean, you start with Florida and then at Baylor. That's a rough, first two games, especially if Cam Rising's not available. But, what are your thoughts on that schedule and, Utah kind of being aggressive scheduling that one?
Yeah, this is one of those schedules that, on paper, it's going to look great for fans, right? They want to be able to see all these big games. When Baylor was scheduled, this was more than 7 years ago that this was scheduled. That was kind of one of their first big Power 5 games that they were getting. They were hoping to kind of start getting these more of these games. And then somehow they stacked this with Florida, and you would think that they would, buy out the Baylor one or something so they didn't have such a hard time. But this is a great opportunity for Utah if they really have the aspirations to be able to move forward, right? Like we've seen them, like you mentioned, Pac-12 back-to-back champions. If they really want to take that next step forward, this is the schedule that can absolutely showcase what this team is, but it could also absolutely unravel them. So I'm curious to see what this does to them. 11 Power 5 teams is a daunting task. They at least have the depth this year to be able to do it. Florida may or may not be down. I mean, I think this is a program that's not hitting at its peak that we've seen. Baylor's obviously a good team, so Florida may not be as tough, but they're still an SEC team that's going to be angry. They still want to be able to showcase what they can do under Billy Napier. So it's not going to be easy, and based on that schedule alone, that's why I have a hard time projecting what Utah's going to do this year. They could win 11 games or they could win 8. And so I think that it's hard to project with Utah this year. I generally get a good vibe on this team, and I think they have the talent. It's just a question of can they sustain it, based on injuries, what's Cam's status, all that kind of stuff. So it'll be fun for fans for sure, but who knows what this will do to their record by the end of the season. Yeah,
it's interesting you said 11-8 because I feel like with Utah, you just kind of pencil in 8 wins. And then from there, is it going to be more than that, right? And like you said, so much of it is Cam. So I know you can't really project because you don't know what his status is going to be. But a lot of when I look at the projections, a lot of it is USC, Washington, even Oregon, and it's almost like again, Utah's like that third, fourth. It's like, well, wait a minute, they are the 2-time defending champs here. Where do you see this team fitting in the Pac-12? And again, I know those first two. Florida and Baylor kind of depend on whether they can make the playoff or not. But where do you see this team in the Pac-12? Is this another? Is it? Could this be a three-peat for this team?
I definitely think they have the capabilities. I think this is a scenario where they have the talent and the depth to be able to do it. Um, even if Cam's not able to go, I think you can rely heavily on that run game. You've got Brant Keithy, who's going to, help you with a lot of different things. I think Andy Ludwig can be, dynamic and flexible with what he's got. So I don't think it's a dire situation. I just don't think you have that veteran experience. You're going to get some turnovers or whatever. So if I think the betting line, if I remember right, is 8.5 for Utah. I think at this point I would take over. I think Utah. I think they're good for at least 9 games this year. That could all fizzle out, but I think this is a scenario where Utah is going to be in that upper echelon of the teams again. I think USC is probably going to be obviously the favorite. It makes sense. Caleb Williams, the Heisman winner. I still think they've got a lot of talent, and we'll see what their defense does, but. Whether Utah's above Washington and Oregon or whether they're below them, I don't know that it fully matters at this point. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of preseason hype for Washington with Michael Penix, and for good reason, but they also have to shore up that defense. So I'm curious to see where that goes, but I think Utah's at least going to be in that mix. I think they'll, barring injuries or whatever may be the case, I think they'll at least be in contention for the Pac-12 championship game deep into the season.
Yeah, well, it is deep into the season when the Buffs will see the Utes. As usual, it's the last game of the year, so there's a lot of time between now and that game. So we'll see what happens. I mean, a lot can happen with Utah. I can't even project what's going to happen with Colorado because they're so new and new head coach. So it's going to be interesting to watch both of these unfold and see what this game looks like when they actually meet in Salt Lake City later this year.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see because I think the hype of Dion will either have exploded by the time Utah plays them, or it'll have fizzled out in terms of how hard it's going to be in his first year. So that'll be a fun game. I think either way. I mean, growing up, I was a Dallas Cowboys fan, so Dion's kind of the guy that I love. But as a media, that has to change a little bit. So.
Yeah, I know Buff fans. They weren't real happy with losing Cole Becker, so. The worst thing would be if it comes down to Cole Becker hitting a field goal to beat him at the end there. But we'll see. There's a lot of time between now and then. I'm sure we'll catch up and chat about the Utes before then. But I appreciate you very much for doing this, and good luck to the Utes this season.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.